Hi everyone, my name is Lindsay Chelf and I'm the Director of Design Services at AOE. Today I'm going to go over accessibility and design to help you create accessible content for your marketing communications, such as Word documents, PDFs, PowerPoints, and other things. We're going to talk about what accessibility means and why it matters, how to design for disabilities, how to create accessible documents, and how to use accessible language when writing content. I'll also be providing a list of resources at the end that we'll send to attendees after the webinar. So, what does accessibility mean in terms of design? Here we have a definition of accessibility from the North Carolina State University Disability Resource Office. This definition applies to physical amenities and accommodations, as well as in the world of digital communication. In the context of design, you want everyone, regardless of ability, to experience and enjoy your content. You're likely familiar with most of these examples of accessibility. The color of traffic lights are distinguishable for people who are colorblind. Crosswalk signs now display icons instead of text. Sign language interpreters are present at most public events, such as concerts, political speeches, graduations, and so on. Public transportation is required to be wheelchair accessible. Sidewalk ramps, braille signage, and wheelchair accessible drinking fountains are some of the ways we've designed the environment around us to provide equal access to all. You might be slightly less familiar with the next examples of accessibility in print and digital communications. From the language you choose, to the style, size, spacing, and color of your fonts, to the back-end work you put into a website's code, or the formatting style you select for your Word document, there are many ways to make your communications accessible. So why does accessibility matter? It matters because it's often legally required, it impacts your organization's reputation, it conveys your message to the widest possible audience, the overall user experience is improved, and most important of all, it's the right thing to do. To further examine why accessibility matters, let's take a look at some common misconceptions. One accessibility myth is that only a small percentage of your audience will actually need accessible content. In reality, more than a quarter of Americans are living with at least one disability. This includes visual disabilities such as blindness, low vision, or color blindness, auditory disabilities such as deafness or being hard of hearing, motor impairments that reduce control of limbs or affect dexterity, and cognitive disabilities such as dyslexia or memory impairment. In addition to these, there are also disabilities that are situational, such as trying to read your phone screen outside on a bright sunny day or trying to listen to a video in a noisy space, or those that are temporary, such as a broken wrist or recovering from eye surgery. There's a phenomenon in accessible design called the curb cut effect, named for those sidewalk ramps I mentioned earlier, in which a design that was intended for a small segment of the population has ended up benefiting a much wider group of people. It's not only people in wheelchairs who use those ramps, but also people riding bicycles, pushing strollers, pulling luggage, and more. More often than not, accessible design benefits everyone, not just a specific group of people. Myth number 2 is that it will take too much time, money, or effort to make your content accessible. Whether it's laying out a project sheet, designing a website, creating a social media graphic, or making a PowerPoint presentation, think about accessibility from the very start. It won't add much time to your process, plus it will save you from having to go back and add accessible measures to existing content. Additionally, websites are considered a public accommodation and therefore required by law to be ADA compliant in terms of accessibility. If a person on your website is unable to access the information they need, they could file a lawsuit against your business or organization. It has happened to Netflix, Nike, Amazon, Domino's Pizza, Burger King, and many other large companies. The same laws don't necessarily apply to documents and graphics unless you're a state or federally funded institution. However, it's best to make all of your digital content accessible regardless of the law because it's the right thing to do. When some people hear the word accessible, they immediately envision an ugly, text-only document or website without colorful graphics, engaging video, or other creative features. However, accessibility actually follows a lot of graphic design and web design best practices, so you don't have to compromise the aesthetics of your content. Plus, when you follow accessibility standards for multimedia, such as graphics and videos, you ensure that everyone, regardless of ability, can experience and enjoy your content. Myth number 4 is a big one. A lot of people wonder if accessible design is worth the trouble, believing that it only benefits the narrow audience it's targeting. First, at AOE we firmly believe that that's reason enough. Designing your content to be accessible is the morally right thing to do. Also, as mentioned earlier, everyone benefits from accessible design, not just people with a specific disability. For example, proper HTML tags and descriptive links on your website boosts SEO, something that many companies will spend thousands of dollars on trying to improve. Customers or clients are happier if they don't have any trouble accessing your content, and it can also spur innovation and creativity within your own organization. Providing accessible content also builds a positive public image of your business and organization. The generation now entering the workforce places a great deal of value on accessibility and inclusivity. You may be wondering how exactly accessibility works. You do your part on your end, and then what? Here's where the assistive technologies come into play. These devices listed here aren't things you need to design specifically for, but rather they will work on the user's end to convey your accessible content to them. First, we have screen readers, which read a document or website either aloud or translated to a braille display for people with blindness or low vision. They can also help people with dyslexia or those who learn better through listening than reading. Screen magnifiers assist people with low vision by increasing the size of the content they're viewing. Speech-to-text software can provide complete control over computer interactions, allowing users to scroll the screen, copy and paste text, navigate through websites, and more. This is helpful for people who have a disability that prevents them from using their keyboard or mouse. There are also alternative input technologies, such as motion or eye tracking devices, that allow people to interact with their computer using the movement of their head, eyes, or other body parts using wearable devices instead of their keyboard or mouse. Sip and puff devices, like the one pictured here, allow users to control mouse movement through a mouthpiece that the user inhales and exhales through. Again, you will not be designing your content to cater to these individual technologies. This is just to show you how people will be accessing your content. Now we'll do a quick overview of best practices when it comes to visual design for disabilities. Whether you're designing a resume template for your employees that will be printed, or you're creating a form on your organization's website, these best practices apply to both print and digital design. First, we have contrast. Contrast refers to the color difference between elements in the foreground of your design, such as text or icons, and the background of your design. As you can see here, you can have too little contrast, which is difficult to read, or too much contrast, which is visually jarring. There are tools online that can tell you whether or not your colors are sufficiently contrasting, which we have provided a link to in our webinar's resources. Color is an important part of any design, but it shouldn't be the only visual means of conveying information. If you were to make your design a grayscale image, would it still communicate your message effectively? If color is used for informational purposes, be sure to add other identifying visuals, such as icons or text. In this example here, someone with color blindness might not be able to tell that the email field on the left needed to be fixed, unless you were to add an icon indicating so, as we have on the right. Legibility means how easy it is to read the individual characters of the font you're using. For on-screen designs, sans serif fonts tend to be more legible. For print, serif fonts have generally been seen as a better option. There are a lot of really neat designs for fonts out there, but the more decorative or narrow ones should be reserved for headlines or ornamental text only. Readability and legibility are often mixed up, but while legibility refers to individual characters of a font, readability refers to the text as a whole. How easy is it for someone to get through a paragraph of text on your website or brochure, for example? For on-screen content, aim for a body text size of at least 16 points, with a line height of between 1.3 and 1.5 times the font size. Make sure your body text isn't laid out in a wide paragraph, which can be difficult to read. If you have text on a website, make sure it's written out rather than part of an image. If the image doesn't load on someone's screen or you don't have alt text applied, then they'll miss out on that information. These two paragraphs are examples of bad legibility and readability versus good legibility and readability. The paragraph on the bottom is in 16-point font with a line height of 1.5, and it uses a clean sans serif font in a color that sufficiently contrasts with the background. When you add up sufficient contrast, proper use of color, and legible and readable text, you end up with accessibly designed and visually appealing documents, websites, and graphics that communicate your message effectively. Not only will you reach a broader audience by making your content accessible, you'd also be doing the ethical and equitable thing. Now that you know the best practices for the visual side of accessibility, which should be applied to every piece of content you create, it's time to delve into the more technical side. Like HTML on a website, the Styles function in Word provides formatting structure to the documents you create. You can access the Styles section in the toolbar when you open Word. It helps you set visual appearance for sighted users, which indicates a hierarchy of information. The more important stuff is going to be bigger, bolder, more colorful, and attention-grabbing than the other content in your document. Styles also provide a logical order for users with visual impairments who may be relying on a screen reader to read your document. Screen readers will use the styles in Word to know which order to read text in, and it also serves as a way for users to navigate by headings and subheadings. Even those without vision disabilities benefit from being able to easily navigate your document. When inserting an informative image, that is one that supplements your content, not just a decorative element, into your Word document, add alt text to it by right-clicking the image, selecting Picture from the menu that pops up, then selecting the Alt Text tab in the window that appears. Next, you'll want to left-click on the image to select it, and then a new menu item will appear at the top, Picture Format. Click on it, then click the Position button and select Inline with Text. You can also add a caption to improve document navigability for screen readers by right-clicking the image again and selecting Insert Caption. Links are also a navigational tool used by screen readers, so make sure that the text you use is descriptive. It doesn't help someone figure out what the link is if their screen reader just says, click here, click here, click here, for every single link in your document. If the link is going to open in a new program, such as Adobe Reader for a PDF, indicate so after the link. Another recommendation is adding metadata to your document, which makes it easier for all users, regardless of disability, to search for your document on their computer. If your document contains a table, you need to denote the header row for screen readers, otherwise the table can be difficult for them to navigate. For sighted users, it's easy to refer to the header of a table whenever needed, but those using a screen reader would have this table's first row read to them as Lecture Videos, yes, 1.5 hours, NA, without the header row marked as such, requiring them to either remember what each column is supposed to be, or forcing them to navigate back up to the top to refresh their memory. When it is properly formatted for accessibility, a screen reader will read this table's first row as Activity, Lecture Videos, Required, yes, Estimated time per module, 1.5 hours, % required to pass, NA. This information is much clearer to the user. To denote the header row, select the row you want and right-click, then select Table Properties. In the window that opens, under the Row tab, select the box that reads Repeat as Header Row at the top of each page. Next, you'll want to add alt text and a title, which you can do by selecting the alt text tab in this window. Be sure to number and caption your table to improve navigability. And lastly, keep the structure of your table simple. Like most Microsoft programs, Word has a built-in accessibility checker. It's a helpful tool to catch anything you might have missed, but it's not a substitute for knowing best practices. PDFs are generally not accessible by default, and are either impossible for screen readers to read, if they're scanned for instance, or the content is formatted out of order to a screen reader. Like styles in Word, PDF tags help users navigate the text of your document in proper order. Also like Word, any image you insert into your PDF needs to have alt text added. The most effective way to make a PDF accessible is to first create it in an accessible format such as Word, and then exporting it, not printing it, to a PDF format. Any formatting and alt text created in the original Word document will be transferred to the PDF. To create an accessible PowerPoint presentation, best practices include using unique slide titles in order to assist screen readers with navigation. If you have multiple slides that contain the same topic and don't want to change the title for each one, indicate that the topic is continued by adding a number out of number note in the title. You may have noticed that toward the beginning of my presentation when we discussed accessibility myths. A screen reader will read each element on a slide, and it's important to check the reading order of those elements. The default is items listed in reverse order, so click and drag your elements into the correct position that you would want them read. Just as in every other setting we've discussed, add alt text to any informational images. You can do so by clicking on the image, and when the Picture Format tab appears in the top toolbar, select the Alt Text button that appears in the toolbar below it. You can also right-click the image and select Edit Alt Text in the menu that pops up. For the benefit of all users, not just those who may struggle with flashing animations, avoid anything that blinks, scrolls, or loops excessively, and also keep transitions between slides simple. Use the built-in accessibility checker to review your work, but remember, it's not a substitution for knowing the best practices. Now we're going to jump into accessible language, or language that is intended for people of all abilities, regardless of their disability, literacy skills, or English capabilities. We all know to write for your audience, but it's worth restating. Be mindful that your readers may not be as knowledgeable about a topic as you are. If you're writing a social media post about a project, err on the side of simplicity. On the other hand, if you're writing a white paper for a bunch of engineers, you can probably get away with more complex language. Use plain language in brief sentences in an active voice. As you can see from this example here, you can get the same message across using half the words, and you will ensure that your message isn't muddied by using words that some of your audience may not completely understand. Lastly, if you're able and it makes sense to do so, incorporate examples and analogies to help explain or support complex ideas. Avoid the use of jargon, slang, and figurative language, which may confuse people unfamiliar with your topic or those who don't speak English as a first language. Be conversational in tone. It's okay to use contractions. Try to avoid the use of slashes, which can throw off a screen reader, and don't use e.g. or i.e. Most people don't know what they mean anyway, so it's best to just say example. It's important to remember that writing with accessible language doesn't mean dumbing things down. You just want to make it so that a wider audience can understand and appreciate your content. Here's a list of helpful resources that we'll be providing to attendees after this webinar. It includes some of the things we went over, such as color, contrast, language, and accessible documents, plus a few extra resources for other types of documents as well as web design. And of course, AOE itself is a great resource, and we encourage you to reach out with any questions you may have about accessibility. When you incorporate accessibility into your design, you not only get visually appealing documents, graphics, and presentations that effectively communicate your message, you also reach a wider audience that you would have otherwise missed. Most important, though, is that providing accessibility is the ethical thing to do. It is no longer a nice-to-have feature, but rather a must-have. Thank you for attending today's webinar. I look forward to hearing from you if you have any questions about accessibility and how to incorporate it into your design. For more information on accessibility or other best practices, be sure to follow AOE on social media. Thank you and have a great day.